I think we're going to put him in a metal cage, and we'll lock the door, and we'll let Ben Santer and Pat Michaels go at it as a fundraiser. That's what we'll do. That was great, Pat. You've raised social networking to a whole new level. Excellent job. Pat will be back to answer questions, but first we're going to hear from George Allen. George Allen served the Commonwealth of Virginia for over 20 years in various capacities. He served as governor. He served in both bodies he served in both bodies of the United States Congress and as a delegate holding Thomas Jefferson's seat in the Virginia General Assembly. He was sworn in as governor in 1964, and Governor Allen brought sweeping modernism and reform to Virginia that he continued throughout his public service career. He made Virginia a national model that he developed and built upon during his congressional career and brought change before it became such an icon. In other words, he made change really work for a change. Last June, Governor Allen launched and serves as chairman of the American Energy Freedom Center, whose mission is to advocate positive ideas for American jobs, for economic prosperity, and to promote increased freedom, opportunity, and competition in the development and use of our energy resources. Please welcome Governor John Allen. George Allen. Oh, God.
Well, thank you. Senator Schmidt, scientists, people from all over the world, policymakers, and early birds all, good morning. And it's great to be with all of y'all. Dan, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you and Joe Bast for your outstanding leadership here with the Heartland Institute and this international conference that has brought together scientists and informed people in a variety of fronts on economics as well as policy. And there are a lot of, we're free people, and we do have free choices and decisions to make as far as the future of our countries. And I'm going to be focused on America. I know we have folks from all over the world, but my focus is on America. And it was great to be with Dr. Pat Michaels. It's wonderful to have him as a lead-off. I'll be the straight man now after listening to you. I've admired Dr. Michaels for many, many years, and he's covered the science, and I'm not going to have a whole lot of graphs for you and so forth with it. Pat's made that case very well. I'm going to focus on ideas and policy choices that we could make. And ladies and gentlemen, the truth is, a free, prosperous, and sovereign country needs to be able to defend, feed, and fuel itself. And the American people, I believe, deserve to have a winning American energy game plan. And that game plan is on papers. You're not going to have to look on that. I don't need a PowerPoint. There's a sheet that has the game plan that will help Americans. And the fact of the matter is, energy is an increasingly important issue. It is one that affects people at their kitchen tables. They know what their monthly electricity bill is. What do they have to pay for natural gas? What do they have to pay at the pump? It affects jobs in our country. It affects our competitiveness, our balance of trade. 41% of our trade imbalance is due to the importation of oil. And it obviously affects our national security as well. And businesses, whether they're small, medium, or large size, are all affected by our energy policies. Now, unfortunately, to use a football term, our leaders in Washington, the prevailing leaders in Washington, have been punting on first down since the 1970s. We've been punting ever since OPEC decided that they're going to manipulate prices by restricting production of oil. We have seen that our country's become, instead of less dependent, we've become more dependent on energy, and most people realize this is not the way that we ought to go. Now, you'll also hear, and I'm going to be straightforward with all of y'all, notwithstanding what some of these pompous elites may say, Americans are not addicted to oil. Americans are addicted to freedom, the freedom and independence to go where and when we want, and I believe Americans ought to keep that freedom and independence. We don't care if our vehicles are running on North Dakota or Oklahoma or Alaska oil or Wyoming coal or Kentucky coal synfuels. It could be reused cooking oil. It could be Texas natural gas. We don't care as long as it's affordable, available, and reliable. Now, the good news for America is, and this is according to the Congressional Research Service, we're number one. America has more energy than any other country in the world, thanks mostly to our plentiful coal and also abundant gas and also oil resources. Russia's number two, Saudi Arabia's number three. Most countries would consider these resources to be a blessing. Our government seems to look at these resources, as a curse. Makes no sense whatsoever. And so that's why our policy in our country, our energy policy is at a crossroads. Either we're going to choose a future of abundant, affordable, and reliable sources of American energy, or we can continue down the road of expensive, imported, and restricted, and highly regulated energy. Now, for a brighter, I'm going to get on the positive side. For a brighter energy future, obviously, you got to play tenacious defense against bad ideas. Dr. Michaels brought that up as well as others yesterday. Let me talk about the positives of what we can do, ideas that can work for our country. Number one, we ought to embrace common sense conservation. Our country, we waste too much. We waste water. We're going to waste food this morning. We waste electricity. And we ought to be looking at common sense, practical ways of conserving. Ideas that can work can be operational practices, systems. There are surface treatments, teleworking. There are a variety of ways of designing buildings that will actually save money, so we're spending less in heating, cooling, and illuminating buildings. I don't mind taking water off roofs to water the landscaping. Pat, at the University of Virginia, I was walking through there with my son who was thinking of going there, and they're giving us a tour, and they're talking about the new dorms and the old dorms. Well, the University of Virginia, what are called the new dorms, are 50 years old, but they're newer than the old dorms, so they're called the new dorms, even though they're 50 years old. That's typically Virginian. And I was thinking, all right, if they put in systems in these dorms that would cost less for heating or cooling or illuminating them, and the new systems or surface treatments would break even in 5 to 7 years, well, that makes sense. You're saving the taxpayers money. In government buildings, whether they're prisons or hospitals or college buildings, courthouses, they're going to be around for 50 to 100 years. And so it makes sense to save the taxpayers money by putting in new innovations that break even in 5, 7 years. Now, I'm not saying that you ought to dictate that to people in their homes, because if you add 15%, 10%, 5% to the cost of home, builders aren't going to want to do it. It'll price them out of the market, and they'll have to get a loan for it. But for the government, for buildings that are going to be around for that long, it makes sense. And as a conservative, I like saving the taxpayers money, and so we ought to be adopting those innovative ideas in government. Now, nanotechnology also is going to improve a lot of innovations in a variety of ways. In life sciences, but particularly in materials engineering, we're going to have lighter and stronger materials, which will take less energy for propulsion. Nanotechnology will also help probably in solar photovoltaics. Nanotechnology is going to be very helpful, I think, in battery technologies. And in fact, one of the most practical alternatives on ground transportation will be batteries, which of course then means we have additional demand for electricity. Now, electricity is the lifeblood of our economy. Electricity was what brought the improvements to life in the 20th century, and indeed, as we're in the 21st century, the demand for electricity is even greater. Your clocks that woke you up this morning to get here at this breakfast, they were electric clocks. No one's winding clocks anymore. We have microwaves, we have Blackberries, we have iPods, computers, everything else. It's a great demand for electricity. In our economy, our country, the most powerful nation on earth, is actually running out of power. And the reason I say that is that with our great dependency on electricity for everything, and including all the data that's being stored for medical records, financial records, business records, personal records, all those are stored electronically in these large data service centers. One data storage center takes up as much electricity every single day, 24 hours a day, as a city with a population of 34,000. And so the demand for electricity is going to continue. And that's why I say it's worrisome we're running out of power. Now, it's not just me saying this. This is the demand is outstripping, and this is with a poor economy, outstripping new generation by 2 to 1. Normally and historically, the North American Electric Reliability Study has showed the demand outstripping 3 to 1. But because the economy is doing so poorly, it's now outstripping, the demand's going up by 13% rather than 18 or 17%, but new generation is still at 6%. So electricity is important. Now, on the backside, we have these power rankings, and these are the latest figures from the Energy Information Administration. This is ranking the 50 states plus the District of Columbia on what folks pay on average in that state, and these are 2009 figures. Now, when you look at these figures, and as you see what the source, you see what the rates are, 1 through 51, and you see what the source of electricity is. Class, the key factor here on price is the source of electricity. And it is very clear that the states that predominantly use either hydroelectric or coal have the best electricity rates. And you may say, what does that matter? I know darn well as a governor it mattered a lot. When we'd go up to New York City and recruit businesses out of New Jersey and Connecticut and New York and have them come to Virginia, the cost of doing business matters a lot. Sure, right-to-work laws matter, the capability of your workforce, but your cost of doing business is a big factor, and technology companies use a lot of electricity, and they say they need perfect power, no sags, no surges, no interruptions, and it has to be affordable. Now, what that means for a state to be competitive for attracting business and investment and jobs applies for a country as well. And so there are two key sources of electricity that are available all over the country. They are coal and nuclear. Those are the most two available. Now, hydroelectric, as I said, it compares very favorably with coal, but that's mostly a function of terrain. And most of the rivers that have been dammed up, and damming up rivers themselves is a controversial aspect. And so for the rest of the country, other than in the West where you have the canyons and the rivers and the Columbia and the Snake and so forth, the two sources need to be coal and nuclear. And most people haven't felt the same pain at the pump through the years. Pain at the switch as they felt at the pump is because coal generates approximately 50% of our electricity. Nuclear is about 20%. Natural gas is 20%. Solar, wind, waste to energy, all of those are about 5%. And hydro is about 6 to 7%. Now, the affordability of electricity will change to our detriment as more costly natural gas is used. Now, natural gas is a great, clean fuel. It really is. And maybe compressed natural gas can be used for fleets of vehicles as well. But natural gas, to be using natural gas for baseload electricity, in my view, is like using bottled water to wash your dishes. Yeah, it'll do the job, but why would you want to use such an important fuel as that? Well, thank you for, or washing your car. And traditionally, natural gas is 3 to 4 times more costly than coal, although we're finding more. Now, the other thing is if natural gas is being used for baseload electricity, it's going to drive up the price of natural gas. And there are some industries and manufacturers that use a lot of natural gas. Tire manufacturers, forestry products, chemicals, fertilizers, glass, paper companies, they use a lot of natural gas. And the National Association of Manufacturers has pointed out that already over 300,000 jobs have moved overseas just in the chemical and paper products industries because of our high natural gas prices, and those jobs are gone to other countries. So what we need to do is support clean coal technology for generating affordable electricity while providing hundreds of thousands of jobs for Americans by every measure, and I like metrics and measurement. Every measure, whether it's cost, affordability, availability, job creation, and reliability, coal is by far the best energy source for baseload electricity in our country. And the coal-fired power plants that are coming online now are removing well over 90% of the nitrogen oxide, the sulfur dioxide, the particulate matter, and the mercury compared to the plants they're replacing from the 1970s. So the bottom line is, the fact is American coal is plentiful, it is relatively inexpensive, and it's ours, so let's cleanly and creatively use our American coal. Now, we need to take ideas wherever I like American ideas, but they're good ideas from around the world. One good idea, and South Africa is the leader in it, is using coal to liquids or coal to gas. And there's some leaders, Governor Daniels of Indiana and Schweitzer of Montana have been leaders in coal to liquids, coal to gas. Every jet flying out of the airport in Johannesburg, South Africa, is flying on a liquefied coal or coal synfuel. Our Air Force, when I was in the Senate, we got a test done, and our Air Force a couple years ago flight tested a coal synfuel. A B-1 bomber went past Mach 1, past the speed of sound, using coal synfuels without incident. Then a 50-50 coal synfuel, jet fuel mixture was put into a F-15, went past Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, with no incident. The great thing about coal synfuels is that it's a proven technology. It's not some pie-in-the-sky research idea. It's proven. It's been around for over 70 years, and it is a drop-in fuel. You don't have to modify the engines to use it. And so South Africa's been leaders. China's building a dozen such facilities, and I think we ought to be looking at creative ways of doing that in America, seeing how we have so much coal and we're the Saudi Arabia of the world when it comes to coal. Now, we also need to remove outdated regulatory barriers to building the next generation of nuclear power plants. Besides the enormous cost and the long safety permitting for nuclear, which also ought to be streamlined, the biggest impediment, I think, for new nuclear power plants in this country is what do you do with the spent fuel? The federal government has gone backwards. There was supposed to be a national repository in Yucca Mountain, Nevada. That has been stopped, which means 104 nuclear power plants right now, or reactors around the country, are storing high-level radioactive waste. I know from the days I was in Mr. Jefferson's seat in the House of Delegates, folks didn't want to have low-level radioactive waste being cited. Folks generally don't like trash dumps or landfills in their communities. They clearly don't like radioactive waste. Now, this, I think, is an impediment. Now, you're going to get some new reactors at existing sites where they have the water and the community, like Lake Anna, Louisa County, Virginia, where they like the low property taxes. They know it could be done safely. But if we're going to expand nuclear, this issue of what do you do with highly radioactive waste is an important issue to be addressed. Now, again, we're burdened by Jimmy Carter-era policies that prohibit the reprocessing and the recycling of spent fuel. Now, the French, I know this is blasphemous to say this, especially so early in the day, but we can learn from the French. The French get about 80% of their electricity from nuclear. They reprocess, they recycle it. And whether it is recycling or pebble bed approaches and so forth, let me just finish it with this point on nuclear. I know darn well that if the French can do it, so can Americans, and we ought to be using these safer, less dangerous, more efficient approaches here in America. We also ought to empower coastal states that want to allow them to take the initiatives to safely explore for energy resources off their coast and provide willing states with 37.5% of those shared royalties. I know Doug Dominich likes that, being from Virginia. Now, let me say this. I'm very much in favor of this, and there has to be a realization of this exploratory rig explosion in the Gulf and the subsequent oil spill. We need to learn what caused this terrible event, whether it was caused by human or mechanical error. And then, once we learn all the facts, adopt whatever are the safest methods. There may be, some folks say, well, gosh, in Norway they use acoustic methods on these blowout preventers. Some say, well, it was human error. Some say it wasn't tested and so forth. Whatever the reasons were, I think Americans are going to say, let's adopt the most and best technologically available approaches for safety in our country. And that's the rational approach to do, to handle this. Not to say we're going to stop it. There are some who say, oh, okay, we got to stop it altogether. Well, we in Virginia, and I know I've been advocating for 7 years to allow Virginia to get out from underneath this federal moratorium. And the reality is even if the folks who say you want to stop all offshore exploration, well, guess what? There's offshore exploration that's going to be going on about 50 miles off the coast of Florida. Not by Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana, but led by the Castro brothers, along with China and Russia. And it is safer if we adopt the best safeguards to be exploring here in our country. And I'd rather be getting that oil from Louisiana or Virginia than having tankers coming in from Caracas, Venezuela. I think that's a safer approach. And the states ought to be able to share 37.5% of those royalties. The precedent was set in Lease Sale 181 back when I was in the Senate for Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi. And the reason the royalty sharing matters a lot is Virginia, what we'd like to do, Governor McDonald and others, is use that for transportation. And when states see that, well, Virginia's using that money for building roads and transportation, they'll say, hey, why don't we do that in South Carolina and Georgia as well? And so that's a reason it ought to be shared with the states and not taken all by the federal government. And to show you how cockeyed and convoluted our federal policies generally have been, the current administration last fall announced that it's taken all of Americans, well, $2 billion of Americans' money and guaranteed a loan to the state-owned oil company of Brazil so that they could explore and produce oil and natural gas off their coast. Meanwhile, they prevent us, or had been preventing us in Virginia and other states from doing it. My goodness, they're just flat running on empty. So the point is, there are a lot of good ideas. For our strategic American energy freedom, we do need free market-based innovative technologies, practical conservation, American coal, American nuclear, American oil and natural gas. We need a diversity of supply. There is no single silver bullet. We indeed need silver buckshot. And good, I'm glad some of you all get that. I've tried that elsewhere and folks had no idea what I was talking about. You all understand the Second Amendment and you're hunters. Now, let me, Pat talked about what we needed to play tenacious defense again, and he had the science behind that, but these draconian EPA regulations, these cap-and-trade schemes, are regressive taxes. The result of these clearly are higher electricity costs, higher food costs, higher fuel costs, higher costs for everything that we buy from a store, and makes our country less competitive and we lose jobs. Now, the ones who are hurt the worst by this are generally middle and lower income people. Folks who are struggling to make ends meet, who aren't saving any money up for their kids' college education, and they're trying to make ends meet. With our Energy Freedom Center, I interviewed a single mother from Prince George's County, Maryland, Brenda Burns, who last summer had to cut off natural gas in her home. They could afford the electricity, but not the natural gas, because in the summer, her daughter was unable, she had to get child care. She was working, best job she ever had, she said, working at Macy's, but she couldn't afford child care and natural gas, so they cut off natural gas. And so didn't have hot water. And I asked her, what would happen if your electricity rates went up just $50 a month? What would you do? She said, well, we'd have to use more candles. That's the reality. Of folks in the real world, while you have these sanctimonious social engineers who are looking at all these schemes and plans, the folks who are hurt are real people in the real world. And I hope they'll think of people like Brenda Burns and the adverse impact on their lives. Now, these costs and all these ideas, and Pat brought up all the charts, indicates to me, team, that we need to fight back. We need to fight back. And the legislators, whether in Washington or in the states, I think are finally, some of them, taking action, because people across America, when they're informed and they understand what the impact of these these schemes are and what it's going to do for jobs, what it's going to do for our competitiveness as a country, what it's going to do to families, they're riled up and they're opposed to it. And I'm glad to see that there's a couple of prominent activities in Congress. Number one is it's going to come up probably this week, is introduced by Senator Lisa Murkowski, and the other is Representative Marsha Blackburn's measure from Tennessee. Now, Senator Murkowski has introduced a bipartisan resolution of disapproval pursuant to the Congressional Review Act, which would veto the legal force and effect of EPA's endangerment finding. This is a one-sentence bill that has 40 co-sponsors on it. In fact, I'm wearing a tie from Alaska. This is the native Indian group out of Alaska, and Alaska understands energy. And at any rate, Lisa's measure, I think, is a really outstanding approach. The best approach is actually by Congresswoman Blackburn, which would amend the Clean Air Act, Section 302G, by adding the following term: air pollutants shall not include carbon dioxide or water vapor. The bill plainly states, quote, "Nothing in the Clean Air Act shall be treated as authorizing or requiring regulation of climate change or global warming," end quote. Now, the language in both these measures are so clear, like the voices you hear in the Tea Party movement, that it's so plain and understandable that even a bureaucrat and even a Supreme Court justice could understand that. So now, if enacted, either the Murkowski or Blackburn resolution or bill would protect our country, but it also is reasserting the point that our country is a representative democracy. Our country should not be run, in our economy and our future and our sovereignty and opportunities for Americans determined by unelected judges who are appointed for life, making an errant decision in a Massachusetts case, and then giving authority to unelected bureaucrats. The people's representatives need to be making these decisions. And if the courts are wrong, or they misinterpreted the law, or the regulators are exceeding their authority, we're a free country, and our representatives got to get off their cushy seats and act to protect the future prosperity of our country. Now, there's several studies from both the right, the Heritage Foundation, and the left, the Pew Foundation, that cite a variety of these cost increases and job losses. Let me just say this in a broader sense. All these energy regulations, these taxes, these costs, these burdens would be imposed on Americans. The rest of the world's not going to follow this. They're actually looking at a transfer of wealth, whether it's this phony artificial market and transfer of wealth out of our country to Europe, or they're looking for subsidies in other countries. But the reality is, folks, we're in competition with the rest of the world. And we can't have our Congress hobbling us and bumbling in the pits while other countries are going pedal to the metal, lapping us. China, Brazil, India, Indonesia, none of these countries are going to impose these regulations and these costs on them. So for us to do this to Americans, for a negligible impact on the climate 40 years from now, is in effect economic unilateral disarmament. It makes no sense. And Pat had all these projections. My goodness, they can't predict the weather 10 days out accurately. How can they predict it 40, 50 years from now? And then you talk about, oh gosh, it's the hubris of man, to think that we can actually change the climate. Lake Michigan, not far from here. How do y'all reckon that was created? There were glaciers, ice caps, all the way to the Ohio River. They receded. There was the Laurentian ice cap in Quebec, fell 8,000 years ago, creating the St. Lawrence Seaway. The waters rose so much all the way into the Mediterranean Sea that it breached the Straits of Bosphorus, and the Black Sea, which had been fresh water, became salt water. Why did the Earth start getting warmer 8,000 years ago? It wasn't because somebody was driving an SUV or somebody had a factory. It happens naturally. We're in a solar system. And so, my friends, what we need to do is have a realistic winning energy game plan for America, using our resources, using our creativity and ingenuity, and not be restricted by some of this mythological gloom and doom. I'm optimistic about America. I'm optimistic about the free world, that if we use our concepts of free people and free enterprise, we can solve these challenges for our country so that we do have abundant, affordable energy, living in a clean environment, and most of all, making sure that every American, regardless of their background, has that opportunity to achieve the American dream. Thank you all so very much, and look forward